up. Good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of Lunchtime Learning. It is a real honour and a privilege to be joined by the President of Propertymark, Stephen McCarron, who also is Director of Donnybrook Estate Agents in Northern Ireland. So Stephen, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. So let's start at the beginning. You started running an estate agency when you were very young, at 24. So, and I think you celebrated your quarter of century last year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So what made you decide to run and own your own estate agency at such a young age?
Exuberance and youth was probably the main drivers in it. Lack of good common sense was one of the other drivers in it. And I had a self-belief in what I could do. I had some really good teachers in the industry who taught me on day one that I should concentrate, or we should concentrate, on the core part of our business in Northern Ireland, which was always new homes. And I found I had a bit of a flavour for that arena in that particular area, and I identified that at a very early stage. And for one reason or for another reason, I'm not quite sure, but I fell in with a couple of developers and struck up a rapport and a friendship with them, and they always seemed to trust me and trust my judgment, even though I was quite young. I had quite a sensible head on me, and they were the people who really pushed me to go out and do it on my own, because they could see that I brought a different dimension to the business, that older, more established people perhaps were getting a bit tired and, resting on their laurels and relying on their reputation that, was built up years earlier. So that's basically how it all started.
Wow. So describe the challenges then that you had when you first started, and how have you managed to grow the business to the success it has got to so far?
So just to give you a complete overview. So when the business started out, we had two young children, both under the ages of 2. We just bought our house, so it couldn't fail. That's the first thing I want to say. It just could not fail. It wasn't going to be an option. So I had to invest all my time and energy, and we had a little money put by, and we invested that into the business. And really, it was determination, guts, and fear that got me through everything. Now, the challenges that throw themselves up, at 24 years of age, understanding everything about HR and employment, understanding everything about what it takes to run a business. It was a case of sink or swim. And to say that I didn't make any mistakes along the way would be, disingenuous, and would be a lie, quite frankly. You have to make mistakes. You can't learn unless you make mistakes. So I've made my mistakes over the years. I've had my challenges. I've had my sleepless nights. And there were days I wondered, was it going to be able to stay open for one more day? But as things progressed, and I learned the things that I needed to learn, and I learned the lessons that I needed to learn, things just naturally and organically started to roll. And we attracted more business because we were seen as young and progressive and energetic and dynamic and all of those things. And quite quickly thereafter, we opened a second branch. So to give you the histrionics of that, I live in a city that's divided by, was then divided by politics, and also divided by a river. And we had an East Bank and a West Bank. And even though my two offices were geographically less than 1 mile apart, we had to have two offices to service everybody in our community. So those two offices worked quite well, and we succeeded, and we built, and we grew, and we built, and we grew. And then my wife came into the new homes aspect of the business. And she's got a fantastic flavour for that end of the business also. And that's her niche area that she really, really enjoys. But of course, things changed in the internet, the advent, or the advancements, if you like, with the internet and websites and so on, portals, etc. But we didn't need to have two offices anymore. That, combined with the fact that the political situation in Northern Ireland had changed, and things had managed to settle down. So we then put the two offices together, and opened a bigger flagship office, if you like. And we again, things were improving. And then obviously their credit crunch came. And at that stage, then we had to take a review of the business because business had slowed up. Builders had mothballed their developments. But we've always stayed lean. This is the best way I can put it. We've always stayed lean, and we've never been sucked into doing anything fanciful just for the sake of going. We've done the latest, greatest thing. And that stood us the test of time. Here we are today, all those years later, in rude health. And if it wasn't for the fact that I've spent the last year out of the office, who knows where we would be now. But I'll be back soon.
Good. We'll come to what you've been doing in the last year, because I know you've been, I can imagine you've been to quite a few different parts of the UK, and not just the UK, America as well. So we'll come on to that in a second. Thank you, Michael Holden, for your kind comments. So interesting and informative, Stephen. I hope he's talking about me, but I think he's talking about you actually, and not me. But thanks very much, Michael, for watching. But just a couple of things I want to unpick with you, please, if that's possible. So you talked a lot there about your mindset. So you talked about having sleepless nights. You talked about could not failing. So for me, mindset's incredibly important. So how do you have such a, I think somebody described it last week to me as an abundance mindset, which I quite liked, or a growth mindset. Where does that come from?
Okay, to give you go back a little bit more to come forward again. So I think everything that's happened in my life has been born out of my childhood experiences. It wouldn't have been a particularly happy childhood experience, and we didn't come from a particularly wealthy background. Things were always very limited. And I kind of guess I said to myself, even maybe without me realizing when I was younger, that I had to do better than that. And I couldn't let that happen to me again, or let that happen to my children, because they're probably the most important people of all. And that gave me the impetus to succeed. That was my driver. That is the one thing that spurred me on and on and on and on at all times. And I kept reflecting back on how things, they were not, believe me when I say they were not great. And from a childhood perspective, when you grow up in that kind of atmosphere and that kind of lifestyle, it can leave you very on an uneven ground. And the one thing, if anybody knows me, is I don't like unless I'm standing on firm ground and I understand where I'm at. But that was the main driver for everything that I've ever done. And that's why my mind is open to all possibilities across every aspect of the business and my life.
Okay. And what was really interesting, you said at the start, actually, you talked about teachers and you talked about mentors. So, and we've had the lovely Sarah Edmondson just send a message, say, my two favourite Stephens. Thank you, Stephen M, for being an amazing mentor and advocate for our industry. So thank you, Sarah, one, for watching. Thank you for your kind words to my favourite Sarah. What can I say? So teachers and mentoring at such a young age. You talked about teachers and mentoring. Again, where did that come from?
For the people that mentored me, is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, when you were that young, because that to me is really wise to be looking at, teachers and mentors at 24 to learn from them as to what to do.
I kind of guessed that I wanted to look up to someone, and that's something that wasn't something I could do when I was younger. So I was always looking for someone that I could anchor to, for want of a better word, and could show me something that was going to be productive. And there was one gentleman in particular, and I sort of called him out in this last year at our Northern Ireland conference, and I'll call him out today if he sees us. Well, that's neither here nor there, but his name was Jerry McAfee, and he was the area director of the then nationwide estate agents. And the thing I liked about him, and the thing that made me respect him the most, was he was such a straightforward, unaffected human being. And he called everything exactly how he's seen it. And it wasn't about having the sharpest suits or the nicest haircut or driving the best cars or anything else. He was born in the wool or died in the wool, if the expression's right, auctioneer and estate agent. It was just in his blood. And everything that he exuded, I could understand and I could feed off. So he was very important, even if he doesn't understand this, he really was. And then there was another gentleman who was also a boss of mine, and his name was Liam McIver. Now, Liam was a completely different kind of person altogether. They were completely opposed in many ways, but he also had, if you like, a sort of quiet calming effect as well. And everything he said and done was just, it was considered and reserved. But what these two individuals made me do was feel calm. And in a world where everything's chaotic, calmness is what was required. So I completely fed off him, and I was like a sponge. So I took all that information in and I used it, and that is why I succeeded so well, because I've taken every good part of what they had and everything I've seen in them as well that I thought maybe wasn't just right that I could improve upon. That's what I did. But it wasn't a conscious thing that I did. But if I can look back now at this age, clearly it was something that I needed in my life. I needed to respect people and look up to them and get something from them, and that's what happened.
So this is a stressful job. It's a bit of a roller coaster. We have some amazing days and we have some really awful days. How do you manage to stay calm and be as relaxed as you are?
I don't. Who said I did? I don't. I go home and I have an absolute fit. We have a sort of a symbiotic relationship where I go off the deep end one day and then someone goes off the deep end the next day. We allow each other to have our days. You have 2 fantastic weeks, and then you sold 12 houses, and the next Friday 5 of them fall in their ass, and the immediate response is for the mind just to go boom, right? But actually, it's just an opportunity to do something else and try and repair what was broken, and not be panic and not to allow yourself just to lose your mind because this has happened. But I'm like everybody else. I mean, I have my off days. There's days I want to go home and bury my head in the pillow and just, for want of a better word, cry my eyes out. It can be quite relentless. But I've learned coping mechanisms over the period of time, and I have a very strong network of support, which is important as well. It keeps me sane and level.
And you know what? That's really refreshing to hear somebody admit to that, because a lot of people think things are normal out there, and and they're not. And we all have different stresses, and we all have different mechanisms of dealing with it. So for you to come and say, actually, you know what? Sometimes it isn't all right. I think it's a great message to send out there. So I think you should become president of Propertymark with messages like, "Oh, sorry, you already are." That'd be your campaign. So talking about Propertymark, what made you decide to actually get involved with the organisation?
Oh, okay. Well, if you've ever been to one of the conferences, you'd know the story off by heart. I made a monumental mess up, probably within the first couple of weeks. I was running before I could walk, and a guy phoned up and he goes, blah, 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 I want to make an offer. And I remember the house, by the way, but I won't say where that is. It sticks in my head. And I wanted to know, was it a timber frame or a traditionally constructed house? And it was like, and I went, traditional? I didn't even know what that meant. And of course, he agreed it, and it unraveled quite shortly thereafter, and it wasn't traditional, it was timber framed. And these timber framed houses were not great quality. So he was unhappy, and then I got wrenched up and told off, and I thought I was going to get kicked out of the job, and I wasn't. And I swore to myself at that point I would never make that kind of mistake ever again. And the most important way is to educate yourself. So that led me on to the then NEA. And kind of always admired what went on in the mainland, because in Northern Ireland we were like years behind the curve, and probably still are in many respects. And I could see all these old, grey-haired, grey-suited gentlemen with double-barrel names, and it sort of appealed to me in a weird kind of way, even though I was quite young. And so I set about, I did the associate assessment, and I remember going to an equally old, grey-haired, grey-suited man here in the town, sat an exam, I can remember the grandfather clock, and passed, and I got my lapel, and I got my certification, and I was just, I was the bee's knees. And from that moment onwards, I have had a love affair with NEA and then Propertymark. And if you cut me in half, it probably will say in the middle Propertymark or NEA, or whichever way around you want to say it. But I am, wouldn't say I'm quintessentially a Propertymark member, but I'm maybe a bit of a super fan. That's the best way to put it.
So you're a raving fan. You liked it so much, you pulled the shave. You became president.
Yeah, I mean that was one of those days, and I remember seeing it was coming up. First of all, I'll tell you, let me just be more honest. It was the regional executive thing, and I remember saying to my wife, "What do you think?" She goes, "Well, you've got a bit of time. You could go and do it." And I applied for it, and I was interviewed whilst I was in Holland. I was on holidays in Amsterdam with the kids, and I got interviewed by Mark Haywood and Lauren Scott. And I got a phone call later that day to tell me. Now, for me, that was just I had arrived. The Kevin's opened up, and it was fantastic. And then the president thing came up, and again, it was one of those moments where I thought, well, I don't have the experience, or I haven't been around this long enough, and do I deserve this, and have I a right to do this, and all of those things. And there was a lot of self-doubt about it. But I've, fair heart never won, or what is it? What a faint heart never won fair maiden, or whatever the phrase is. Anyway, and I decided I would do it because I've always done things that put me out of my comfort zone, and here I am. I think it was one of the best things I've ever done.
Fantastic. Can I just jump on what you just said there? And I want to come back and talk more about Propertymark. But you talked about you've always been happy getting out your comfort zone. So, for a lot of people, I agree, that's where the magic happens, outside your comfort zone. But there's a lot of people that really struggle with that. So what tips, what advice would you give people that want to get out of their comfort zone, but really struggle with it? How do they do it?
Well, what is it, that expression is? The only thing to fear is fear itself, right? So everything, in my mind, I've learned this is that everything you seem to be afraid of the fear rather than the actual action. And you have to allow yourself sometimes to start off small and do something that you just wouldn't ordinarily do. And I find now, maybe I'm blessed or luckier because of the luck of the Irish or whatever the case may be, but I found that if I do that, it's never turned out as badly as I anticipated, or it hasn't gone as wrong as I maybe felt it would. I don't know that I would say there's magic in it, but the reason I did it was because I was kind of forced into doing many things for the greater good of the family. And I have had an experience recently with someone who I was mentoring, who has done something like that, and he's really stepped out of his comfort zone. And he rang me recently and went, "I'm really glad that you told me to do that." I didn't tell him, sorry, let me rephrase this. I didn't go, do it. But I told him that he would probably not regret it. And I told him what I felt he needed to do. And he went and he done it. And I already know that he's knocking it out of the park. And it just needed someone to to be reassuring and to let him know that there's a way back. Because by the way, if you jump off, there's still a way back. You're not going to lose your footing, you're not going to lose your career or anything else. But sometimes risks equal reward. And in this business, if you don't take a risk, you won't be rewarded. It's as simple as that. It's just a balance.
Okay, I like that, risk and reward. Thank you. So coming back to Propertymark. So as you said at the start, being president involves loads of duties, loads of regional meetings, loads of traveling, loads of speaking, going to the Realtor conference in America. So what have your, let's say, 3 biggest learnings been whilst being president?
The first thing I would say is this, that our membership, for want of a better word, right? This is something that I'm trying to assimilate in my head. When we all meet at conferences, the togetherness is out of this world, and people feel almost as one, and they're learning from each other, and they're, if you like, sparking off each other, and there's a real positivity in the room. And when I was in America, the one thing that I noticed was that all of the realtors, everybody was collaborative, and everybody wanted to support everybody else, and everybody else wanted to lift each other up. But when I leave a conference, I don't see that togetherness, and it's almost as if in the UK we have this scenario where we have what we hold, and people are very, protective of what they have, and they need to perhaps be a little bit more open and support their fellow members in their cities and whatever else, because together we can do greater things than if we don't do them together. And that's the one thing the American trip has taught me, that I think we can do so much more together, and we can help each other so much more, and we can raise each other up so much more. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to hurt your business. There's just too much, suspicion people have around each other. But that melts at conferences, and that's the one thing that I've found very refreshing. The other thing that I would say in my experience had so far is, again, about getting out of the comfort zone. The first time you get up and speak in front of a crowd of people, right, in your head, you're going, these guys must think I'm an absolute div. Right? And what could I possibly say to them that they're not sitting looking at me going, did you? Or whatever the expression is, right? But actually, people are very engaged about what you say, as long as the message is on trend and is correct. It's not about getting up and talking about what I had for breakfast and I'm going on my summer holidays or anything else. It's about delivering the message of Propertymark. It's about delivering about what Propertymark does, how Propertymark helps its membership, how the membership, and most importantly, how much more the membership could get involved in Propertymark, because it is a two-way street. And this is something I've been stressing for the last year. We need to get our members to become more involved and more interactive. And there's a piece to be done around that. And that's what I want to continue. And I also believe we need greater collaboration as well. And that's something else that I think I want to impart upon people, that it is not something to fear, but it is something to actually embrace and look forward with. It's been an immense pleasure, and it's nearly over, and I'm feeling quite emotional about it. And I've said this to David Fodda as well. The last conference is next week in Belfast, so it's in my home area, and I'm preparing myself for. I don't know. I'm going to be a gibbering wreck by the end of it. I can feel it inside me. And David Fodda and I have had an amazing journey, and he keeps calling me his brother from another. But you know what? I think by the end of this, he feels like a brother. He really does. So it's not as if we're never going to see each other again or anything like that, but it's just going to be it's been a really emotional journey in that respect. And some of the people I've met have just been outstanding, and how I couldn't come away with that being a better human being, it would be impossible.
Lovely. So again, just a couple of things that you mentioned there about the more involvement and collaboration. How do you think people, whether it's with Propertymark or whether it's just agents collaborating more, what do you think needs to happen for them to be more involved, one in Propertymark, and just to collaborate? I mean, I'm seeing more and more collaboration now than I've ever seen before, with agents wanting to support and help each other, and hopefully doing it for the greater good, which is our customers. And all of us should want to raise the standards.
That's the part that I see. Okay, so I think when you look at the American, by the way, I'm not here to sort of bang on about what America does. I'm not cheerleading for them, but what I think is that if you look at the industry in America and how highly thought of realtors are, and then where we are in terms of where people consider us, slightly above politicians. I think if the public could see estate agents being more collaborative. For example, I'll give you an example. If I'm selling a house and my colleague up the street, Frankie, for example, my client is interested in buying a house after I've sold theirs, that I say, listen, my fellow agent up the street has this property for sale. I know he has it for sale. Let me ring him. Let me organise a viewing for you. Let's do something like that, right? Well, that sort of shows that there's trust amongst each other. And if you can show there's trust amongst each other, then that radiates out into the public for the public to believe that we can be trusted. And I think that's the bit that we're missing at this minute in time. And I think there should be more of that. But again, I think there's a natural suspicion amongst the estate agents, and it's back to this idea that what we have, we're going to keep, but we don't want to let anybody in. And I think that's a mistake, and one that I would like to see rectified.
Okay, interesting. So you've got a big conference going on at Wembley very soon, and I think Jason Lee's put on a very good, panels that I've seen. You've got some exceptional people there. You've got some exceptional speakers. So I don't know whether there are any tickets left, but how do people, whether they're members or non-members, try and organise to get down there?
Okay, well, there are a variety of ways in which people can obtain tickets or whatever conduit they want to do. So it can be done straight through the Propertymark website. You can go on the Propertymark LinkedIn page or on the Facebook page, and you can message people, or message me, or message any of the presidential team or anybody throughout Ireland. We are all well enough connected, and we can send people in the right direction. Now, I know there's a limited number of tickets available, and I kind of feel like people are going, those who are sort of sitting on the fence ought not to, because this is going to be, I don't think it'll ever be repeated in the format that it's going to be done this time around. And it's not to be missed. It's a real one-off event. Now, you know, there's no reason why this won't succeed and people won't come away going, that is the most amazing thing I've ever attended. There's so much for everyone at it. I mean, the one thing I'm really excited about, I can't believe, is Jez Ratner. I mean, the icon of the 80s. He's the guy I'm going to see. He's the guy that's got me most excited. But of course, we're going to have amazing suppliers there as well. And I would like to emphasize to my Northern Ireland colleagues and friends and members that I know it takes a flight and there's a hotel involved and stuff like that there, but it's a real investment in your business to go and see what else is out there. And you know, you have to open one's mind to everything and every possibility. So that would be the message, if I could deliver it to anybody today, would be, stick on, go and see it. I'm sure it's a business deductible from your tax bill, whatever the case may be, but I'm no accountant.
Okay, so what's next for Stephen after the presidency then? Is it back to Donnybrook?
Well, I mean, this is the other thing about me. I'm a workaholic, and even if I'm at a conference or whatever, I don't stop working. And I'm working the night before, and I'm working the day after, and I'm working in the airport, and I'll work. But I like my downtime. I am standing for the board, the one NEA seat that's available, and I do feel like I've still got an awful lot left in me to give to Propertymark. I think, you know, enough experience to know I've been around the block quite a few times, and we all have our different specialities, and we only have our different slants on how things should be done. But I am a firm believer that collaboration is the key. You're not going to agree on everything, but togetherness is the most important thing. And I believe I can bring a certain energy to Propertymark to further its aims, especially regarding prop tech, especially around widening our scope across all of the world, because the world is getting smaller and there are so many other really compatible organizations that we can learn things from, and they can learn things from us. So I don't take anything for granted. I really do want to continue my journey. I really do want to become a board member, but I also accept that that's down to our membership and whether or not they think that I'm a suitable candidate, and I will defer to their judgment.
Okay, well, look, I wish you massive success and good luck with that. So a couple of final questions for you, Stephen. I think you are kind enough to be a mentor with Agents Together. So I wanted to thank you for that on behalf of people. And I know you are making a massive, massive difference to the mentees that you work with. So thank you. What what made you get involved with Agents Together, and what do you personally get from it?
I don't want to sound, I mean, I don't want this to sound some kind of, I come away with this great sense of well-being. I actually want to, I see me in every single person, and I want to make sure that they can avoid, where possible, pitfalls that I've made, or if I've experienced something in terms of how I felt in my head, my mental health, whatever the case may be, that I've come out the other side, and that I can give them that experience and tell them how I think they can uplift themselves and just become better. That, I mean, people talk about, we can mentee people into their business, but the headspace is where you start. Everything else will follow thereafter. If it's not right up there, it's not going to be right anywhere else. And that's the thing that I want to do. And it's not because I'm going to go away. And, I still feel like myself. I don't particularly go away and feel like, I've done a great job. I'm not that type of person. I'm not bigging myself up. I just want to give something back. Actually, estate agency has been such an exceptional thing for my life. It's probably saved my life in many respects. And it's given me a fantastic living. It's allowed me to bring up my children in a safe environment and to be able to educate them. And I just feel like now I owe the world something back. It's that simple.
Brilliant, thank you. So what do you do? Any recommendations on books, podcasts that have helped you over the course of your journey?
Probably this is not the right answer. I'm not a big podcast person. I love music. I listen to music. That's my thing. Morning, noon, and night. And I have my earpods in because I'll be listening to music after this. And it's in the car, and it's at home, and it's everywhere else. And that's what I use. I don't. No, I'm not a podcasty kind of person. No, I will say this, and I'm not giving anybody a shout out, but the House of Property, I love watching. I just love Katie and Martin. I just love what they do. I think they're just they spark off each other.
One of the podcasts is exceptional, and they're very, very consistent with it. And but the chemistry between the two of them, who would you describe them as? It was going to be Phil and Holly, but we can't say that anymore. So hopefully they don't go down that route. Then there was Pierce and Susanna Reid. So who would you, where would you put them?
Interesting. I think they're too unique to pigeonhole them into anybody. If I don't hear good morning from Martin Baum, then my week isn't going to be good enough. And I think they call it as they see it. The two of them are two exceptional people. They're very intelligent. They have their finger in the pulse. They know what they're doing. They're two ex-presidents. That's neither here nor there. Yeah, I mean, we could all learn things from them, but likewise, we can all learn things from each other as well. It's not an exclusive thing. But that's my podcast, if you like. After that, music.
Yeah, no, they are. It is exceptional. So if you're listening or watching, give House of Property a watch. 8:35 Thursday morning, live times. But no, they are very, very good. And Jason, thanks for listening on your beach holiday. So really, really grateful. And I'm sure you're going to have a really successful event in June at Wembley. So, and I'm sure there's still tickets available.
Is Mr. Lee in holidays?
Apparently so, but you shouldn't have put that. You're in trouble now.
Hope he's got plenty of suntan on because he looks like a guy that would burn.
So, Stephen, thanks very much for being a guest. If people want to get hold of you, how do they find you, please?
So they can get me at Stephen McCarron at propertymark.co.uk, or they can get me on my office number, which is 0871 343 600.
Brilliant. Well, look, thanks a lot. Thank you for being a brilliant guest.
Thank you so much.
So much as well, and have a good conference, and I wish you every success becoming a Propertymark board member. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you.